Ready, we'll get started with the conversation. Welcome everyone to this roundtable on America's national debt. Welcome to the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Energy Policy, and Regulatory Affairs. America's national debt is historically high and rapidly increasing. Our fiscal trajectory without a significant course of correction is unsustainable. The United States currently owes roughly $39 trillion for its explicit obligations, such as U.S. Treasury bonds. But what's worse is for its implicit obligations, such as payments owed by law to Social Security and Medicare recipients. America owes well over $65 trillion. We have known for decades that our national debt is too high, and it presents a danger to the security of future generations. But alarmingly, rather than change our ways, we have a problem. In recent years, has shifted federal spending into overdrive. As a result, the United States' explicit debt has grown by over 42% since the months just before COVID-19 pandemic hit, driven by out-of-control deficit spending. We are now paying more in interest on our national debt than we are spending on our national defense. Experts estimate that in as few as 5 years, interest payments on the debt could be the single largest item in the federal budget. America's debt and deficits threaten our economic security, our national security, and the prosperity of future generations. They place pressure on consumer and business interest rates. In short, if the government has to take out debt, it's competing against individuals and businesses who also need to take out that debt. The affordability of Americans' daily lives is in jeopardy, and the nation's flexibility to spend as much as may be needed to meet military and societal challenges is a challenge. If we continue on this unsustainable spending path, our children and grandchildren, our future, will be crushingly burdened with paying for our past spending. Some may be tempted to say that we have heard for decades that America's debt is too high and that we have to change our ways before the sky falls, but the sky hasn't fallen, so how is it different now? They might ask. A few key alarm bells are now ringing, which is different. First, what economists call the convenience yield of the U.S. Treasury bonds we rely upon to finance federal spending has turned negative. In layman's terms, this means that the days are gone when Treasury bonds were thought to be safe and that buyers would snap them up before other countries' bonds, even if other countries' bonds paid higher interest. As a result, we now have to pay more interest on our bonds, rapidly compounding our already severe debt. Second, the rise in Treasury bond interest rates means the benchmark interest rates for mortgage rates, auto loan rates, student loan rates, credit card purchases, and other borrowing have all gone up. That is making daily life less affordable for our constituents. And third, large and rapidly growing debt, especially debt at the levels reached at the post-pandemic era, has been documented to slow our economic growth, which is in the very given title of this committee, and that's why we're having it in this committee. That again translates to less affordability for our constituents. Because of the slower U.S. growth rates in the 21st century compared to the 20th, it now takes 56 years for the U.S. standard of living to double compared to just 26 years in the 20th century. And finally, history shows that when a great power begins to pay more in interest on its debt than it does on national defense, as the United States has now done, that country is on a fast path to being a great power no more. For its part, the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is working hard to rein in reckless spending that has produced our current fiscal situation. In just the past 2 months, the committee has passed 12 bills to drive down waste and fraud in federal spending, which the Government Accountability Office has identified as responsible for hundreds of billions of dollars or more in losses in the American taxpayer. Today, we have before us a fantastic panel of experts. I believe we have 3 doctors in the room, which is fantastic. And so I look forward to hearing your testimony, and I would now yield to my good friend and colleague, Ranking Member Frost, for his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to our friends for being here today. First, I do have to acknowledge something that, I do object to the way this is being held. You're right, Mr. Chairman, we have some great knowledge here. Unfortunately, the four of you are not really witnesses because this is not a congressional hearing, and what you say will not be put into the congressional record, and this is not governed by any kind of rules or anything like that. And I have to bring it up, and not to pin this on the chairman, I think there's a bigger thing going on here relating to an investigation looking into Jeffrey Epstein and my colleagues not wanting us to be able to put forth motions. And that's why we're in a roundtable and you're not really congressional witnesses today on a very important subject that I do think needs to be put into the congressional record governed by the rules of this body. So I have to say I do object to that, but I will turn to the topic of the roundtable, our national debt. I agree with the chairman and my colleagues across the aisle that our national debt is a serious issue, that Congress has a responsibility to address it. I also say this as the youngest person in the United States Congress who will be burdened with this for the rest of my life. We shouldn't do that by gutting critical programs that are a lifeline for the most vulnerable people in our nation and working class Americans. But despite the promises and despite controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House of the last year, Republicans have not reduced the national debt, but have massively increased it. Their one big beautiful bill has increased the national debt by at least $4 trillion. This is the most significant increase to the national debt of any recent piece of legislation. And it's a massive wealth transfer from hard-working Americans to the ultra-rich, powerful, and mega corporations. I don't see how handing out tax giveaways to billionaires and politically connected corporations will help us address our national debt, because believe it or not, tax giveaways cost our nation lots of money. The One Big Beautiful Bill cuts taxes for the wealthiest 10% of households by more than $14,700 per year. It cuts taxes for the wealthiest 1% by more than $50,000 a year, totaling in $1 trillion in tax breaks and tax giveaways for the top 1%. To pay for these giveaways to the rich, the One Big Beautiful Bill guts Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. These are programs that children and families use to help cover their basic needs, especially in a time of inflation and high prices. As a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill, 65,000 Floridians are expected to lose their health coverage. I heard from a constituent that said, quote, "My family is dealing with a stage 4 breast cancer diagnosis. Without the tax credits in the Affordable Care Act, we will not be able to afford our insurance and have access to life-saving medicine. As a result of congressional Republicans' laws, we can expect to spend even more of the federal budget on debt servicing. We can expect higher interest rates, crowding out investments, and slowing economic growth." Now, congressional Republicans are taking up Reconciliation 2.0, pushing to allocate tens of billions of dollars for an out-of-control agency that has been unlawfully executing Donald Trump's mass deportation campaign, on top of hundreds of billions of dollars for President Trump's illegal war in Iran. Even if it were to end immediately, the president's war is estimated to cost taxpayers closer to $1 trillion. This is only adding to our national debt, costing the next generations, a cost that the next generation will have to bear. And that doesn't even capture the immediate impact on Americans across the country. Gas prices in my district are now over $4.50 per gallon. This is a 55% increase since the president's war started. We are seeing similar increases across the entire nation, and we can expect to see costs of groceries go up. Families in my district and in each of my colleagues' districts are struggling to afford the high cost of living, the high cost of rent. Historically, Republican financial policies have hurt their constituents. Unemployment rates have been much lower at the end of Democratic presidencies and higher at the end of Republican presidencies. Unemployment was down under Biden, Obama, and Clinton, but it was up under Bush and Trump's first term. We must invest in the success of the American economy, and the way to do that is to invest in Americans. Congress can and must take serious steps to lower our national debt without devastating vulnerable families. We're at a critical moment, and our constituents deserve far more than what congressional Republicans and Donald Trump have delivered. And hopefully through this, we can come up with some solutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Our panel, and welcome you all to make an opening statement, introduce yourself, and then we'll just proceed down the line.
On my behalf, I'd like to get to the discussion as soon as possible. My name is Bill Beach, and I've been introduced in your documents. I'm with the Fiscal Lab on Capitol Hill when we work with Republicans and Democrats to get legislation in front of CBO and the Joint Tax Committee that will address these questions. I think we'll all have a lot of data which we'll put before you, and you already have these data points. CBO reports very nicely. So I'd like to kind of pass on to a little bit deeper in my submitted testimony to the things that I think are important for us to keep in mind as we think about the consequences of a fiscal crisis. I don't have anything on taxes in these remarks, but clearly that has to be addressed in the Ways and Means Committee, and I think a redesign of our tax system is well called for, since it's really not suited to raising a lot of money, additional money now, than for various reasons. So let me point out that our real problem, and this is a premise for this discussion, what's really driving our current deficits is on the mandatory spending side of the equation. And that includes net interest payments, which are rapidly increasing because of the amount that we have borrowed in just the recent years. I think I calculated that mandatory programs are growing 2.5 times faster than the other portions of federal outlays.
Wow.
And that's something that should concern everyone across the political spectrum. How can we design our mandatory programs? They're very important. Healthcare, Social Security, working age healthcare programs, so that they don't crowd out other things that are important for those very same constituents. I like what this committee within its jurisdiction is doing, and I looked at a whole series of your bills that you and others on this committee have proposed in this particular Congress. And I just picked out a couple, but I list all of them in the appendix, and I think that they're excellent, because finding waste is important, but abuse is usually the first point of waste. Where people are abusing the system and not using it correctly. We had trillions of dollars which went out to help businesses overcome the difficulties in the COVID period, and it was just very sad to see the abuse that came across from people who have no political orientation at all, but they're just there gaming the system. So I applaud all these efforts. I particularly like the bill that you had, Mr. Chairman, setting up a national inspector general and some new data sources that would be used for the purposes of finding abuse. So I think there are just, very briefly, just a few things we need to keep in mind when we think about the consequences of debt. So there's an expression that I use whenever I can. It's called the Hamiltonian norm. It has nothing to do with the Broadway musical, though that's great for this particular thing that everybody knows Hamilton now. But the Hamiltonian norm is essentially a kind of a culture that Congress has had since the founding, that when one Congress excessively spends more or taxes less, then Congresses subsequently will come in and bring things back to kind of a balance. And the norm here turns out to be somewhere of annual deficits between 3% and 4%. Now we're on our way to 6.5%, maybe more. And so I think the restoration of that norm is really important. People do expect Congress to balance over time. And that's done regardless of party. Democrats and Republicans have done that equally well, and we need to restore that because we have really separated ourselves from the norm. Ever since basically 2005, 2006, that norm has slowly disengaged, and we need to re-engage it. I think the second reason we should definitely be concerned is the economic disease that will keep Kevin Warsh awake at night, just like it kept his predecessors, and that is inflation. Inflation is so much worse for people in low-income parts of the income distribution than it is at the high income. My own estimates are that if you have an inflation rate of 4% on average across, and I was the Commissioner of Labor Statistics, so I've really studied this area, then if you get into the bottom half of the income distribution, you can expect an inflation rate of about a half a point more. And if that's repeated month after month after month, then purchasing powers, especially if wages aren't keeping up, it's very bad. And why do I mention this with respect to deficits? It's because one of the ways that inflation can get started, not the only way, but one of the ways, is for Congress to pass legislation, spending legislation, with the intention of increasing aggregate demand to stimulate the economy, but having the unintended effect of causing that aggregate demand to spur price increases. This may have happened in the 21 episode, 2021. There can be inflation for any number of reasons, but in our particularly fragile economic environment, we have to be so careful with deficits re-stimulating inflation. We're seeing inflation now for gas prices, the war, and all that kind of business. So that's my point. It can be caused by a number of things. And let me just say one more thing. And it's a point you raised, Mr. Chairman, that growth rates can be affected by high debt. Now, it just isn't the height of the debt as a percent of GDP. It's the rate of growth in that federal borrowing that crowds out private investment. Just to give you a notion of why we ought to be very concerned about the 90% of GDP number, it just seems to be in the developed world for some strange reasons. That number, when we've reached that, we begin to get a slowdown. The annual growth rate in GDP from the first quarter of 2022 to the first quarter of 2026, a 4-year period, that was 2.6%. So keep that number in mind. That growth rate slowed to 2.4% for the 2-year period, 24 through 26. And if we look at the 1-year period, that growth rate has slowed even further. We breached the 90% level in 2020. And we're sitting right now, well, maybe above 100%, but as of the end of 2025, it was at 98%. Is this a demonstration that the 90% rule is applying to the United States? It might be, and I don't think we should press the issue. We should say, let's recommit to the Hamiltonian norm in some fashion if we have to do something on the tax side or spending side, and start bringing those deficits down. I have a few suggestions on what we can do. One of the easiest things, and one of the things that I worked hard on when I was commissioner in the Biden administration, I did 2 years under President Trump, 2 years under President Biden, was to bring the COLA adjustment metric from using the CPIW, which was invented after World War I, and substitute for that the CPIU, which is the official measurement of inflation. Not the change CPI, just the CPIU. That little change it reverberates throughout the government in all kinds of contracts and in not only Social Security benefit estimates, but throughout many different departments of government to save literally hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a small thing to do and could be legislated. Regulatory reform, a regulatory freeze is something which everyone could embrace at some point. I think a lot of economists across the political spectrum say that regulations can be damaging to growth. And so we would encourage this committee, which has a significant regulatory authority, or at least authority to look at regulatory budgeting or to do things of that nature, to look at a regulatory freeze. Research that I've completed indicates that could have a bigger bang for the buck than a tax cut and lower inflation. And so there's a host of things we can do. We need to do something. You don't have to reform everything. You don't have to even reform a big program to signal to financial markets that this Congress is serious about its debt. I would suggest that would be the wrong move because it oftentimes is an excuse for doing nothing. We can't reform Social Security, therefore let's just not do anything. I would say find a few small things, get those on the books, and say, this is our intent. We're intent upon bringing that deficit down from 6% to something between 3 and 4%. And I think financial markets and others will look at that as a clear indication of the direction that you intend to go.
Thank you. Dr. Rao.
Okay, Thanks very much. Thank you, Chairman Burleson, Ranking Member Frost. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable. So I think the math on federal fiscal challenges leaves a little room for further delay. And my testimony focuses on what I believe the most productive responses will be, which are those that realign spending incentives across government. So I'm going to make 4 points of budgetary background, followed by 4 recommended policy actions. I'll try to focus a little bit more on things we haven't covered yet. Point 1 relates to your question, Mr. Chairman, about where is the urgency. People have been talking about this for years. The federal budget is under severe immediate pressure. Net interest outlays reached $970 billion in 2025. That's 25% of federal revenue outside the Social Security system. Using the CBO projections, I calculate that share rises to 35% by 2036 and 48% by 2056 under current law. But already in a situation where 1/4 of every revenue dollar outside Social Security is going to pay interest, that's immediate and severe pressure and demands immediate action. And the projections going forward assume that the average interest rate of federal debt will still be a benign 4.2% all the way into 2056. If interest rates rise even a little bit, then interest is going to subsume even more of the budget. Second point of background is that the balance sheets of state and local governments are fragile, and the federal government does not have the fiscal capacity to be able to absorb pieces of those. State and local debt and unfunded liabilities, pensions and retiree health total approximately $9 trillion. And servicing these obligations is costing states almost $500 billion each year on an accrual basis. In California, it's 19% of the revenues that California raises, and in Illinois, it's 26% of the revenue that California raises. Third point of background is that these challenges reflect spending problems, not revenue problems. Federal revenues have averaged 17.3% of GDP historically and are projected to rise to 17.8% over the next 10 years, while outlays rise from a historical average of 21.1% of GDP to 24.4% over the same period. At the state and local level, there's a structural gap of about 4% of GDP that's mostly covered by federal transfers. And background point 4, this has been stated already, but I'll just reemphasize it. The biggest spending drivers are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Of the $7 trillion the federal government spent in fiscal 2025, those programs plus net interest accounted for 49% of outlays. CBO projects that'll rise to 58% by 2035. And the federal government provided $1.1 trillion in grants to state and local governments in 2024, with Medicaid alone accounting for over half. Okay, so now for a few of the policy ideas that I recommend in my written submission. First, Congress should strengthen anti-fraud incentives, especially in Medicaid. States have to be held accountable for misspending federal money. Federal agencies reported $37 billion in Medicaid improper payments in 2025. But roughly 3/4 of beneficiaries in Medicaid are in managed care plans, where CMS largely checks capitation formulas rather than whether services were actually delivered. So I propose that Congress should direct CMS to incorporate managed care audit results beyond capitation into its improper payment methodologies. In addition, the ACA expansion's 90% federal match means states bear only 10 cents of each fraudulent dollar for the expansion population. A larger state cost share would better align incentives with program integrity. The same principle applies to SNAP, where the new cost-sharing rules should apply uniformly without loopholes. Second policy action, I recommend that the Census Bureau adopt a full income measure. The Census Bureau income measure right now excludes Medicaid, employer-provided health insurance, and refundable tax credits. Even its supplemental measure assigns zero value to Medicaid and Medicare, meaning transfer programs literally cannot reduce poverty under the federal government's measures, and that explains why the official poverty rate has remained between 11 and 15%, while over the same period, average transfers to the bottom quintile have risen more than fourfold to $45,000 per household in real terms over 5 decades. Third recommendation is that the federal government should incentivize state financial independence, especially in the area of employee benefits. Congress could condition the federal tax exemption for municipal bond interest on adherence to pension funding standards. That should be paired with an explicit no bailout provision of public pension plans to help protect the federal budget from state budgetary challenges. Fourth, and finally, Congress should make the household cost of federal borrowing visible. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the federal debt and deficits are adding significant yield premiums to interest rates, and that drives up the cost of borrowing for individuals, whether we're talking about mortgages or consumer credit or other forms of borrowing. So under the Congressional Budget Office's 2 basis point debt sensitivity assumption, debt accumulated over the past 20 years would have raised long-term interest rates by 1.3 percentage points. Under what I would consider to be more consensus debt sensitivity assumptions from research, the true effect is double that, 2.6 percentage points. What does that mean? Consider somebody taking out a new mortgage today. Okay, right now the rates are about 6.45% on a 30-year mortgage. That rate could be down at 3.85% if the debt to GDP ratio had remained at its 2006 level when Dr. Holtz-Eakin was head of the CBO.
Whoa.
That means that for a median-priced new home with a 20% down payment, that translates into roughly $515 more per month in mortgage payments. And over the lifetime of the loan, about $185,000 more in lifetime interest. That is a hidden tax from decades of massive federal deficits. So my recommendation is that Congress should direct the CBO or GAO to publish a dashboard showing how federal debt affects mortgage costs and other interest rates, making these effects visible to voters. Although if you don't, I've already launched my own calculator of this on my Substack, the Fiscal Reality Check, where citizens can go and see how much of their monthly mortgage payments are thanks to the federal government's debt binge. Pretty incredible that on a new mortgage for a median house right now, $515 more per month. That's because of increased debt and deficits over the last 20 years. Well, these measures by themselves are not going to close a fiscal gap of more than 4 times GDP when you include all of the unfunded liabilities from Social Security and Medicare, but they would meaningfully shift the debate towards whether current spending is achieving its aims. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Holtz-Eakin?
I'm Doug Holtz-Eakin, and thank you for the chance to be here, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Frost. I look forward to the opportunity to answer your questions first and foremost, but let me make sort of 3 quick points about the setting. The first is, it's not a mystery where the debt came from. We closed the 20th century with a balanced federal budget, and that happened because care was taken to not have a structural mismatch between revenues and spending. It added up on average. And when there were emergencies and large budgetary responses ensued, Congress came in and cleaned up afterwards. And so we ran the debt down after World War II, ran the debt down after recession in 80, 81. All of the responses were legitimate, but there was a cleanup afterwards. In the 21st century, both of those disappeared. We have a structural mismatch between the spending and the revenue, and we've had large fiscal responses to the Great Recession, pandemic, with no attempt to clean up afterwards. And the result is we now have debt at 100% of GDP. We have to change that 21st century culture. That's the fundamental challenge. On the structural one, the thing that I would emphasize, we've heard about the large amount of spending that's in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It's all true, but the more important thing is that those large programs, Social Security and Medicare in particular, grow faster than everything else, and they grow faster than revenue will plausibly grow. Social Security is supposed to grow at about 5.1% per year. Medicare is at 6.5. Revenues are going to grow at 4. So you can raise taxes and close the gap, but unless you change the growth rate of those big programs, it just spreads back out again. You get the deficit problem back. There's no durable fix that can be done without taking on the growth rates of those programs. That should be kept on everyone's radar screen as part of the solution. Third thing I'd say, or second major point is, people talk about the cost of the debt being the big meltdown, the sovereign debt crisis that's somewhere out in our future, and we just don't know exactly when, and people ask all the time, Doug, when is that going to happen? And I say, I don't know, but I don't see any reason to find out. There's no reason to run that experiment. Let's take care of business, because we're incurring a cost from the way we're running the budget as it is. Business as usual is to spend $7 trillion, raise $5 trillion in taxes, and borrow $2 trillion, $1 trillion of which is interest on previous borrowing. That $2 trillion is not available to anyone to go to college, to finance a merger and acquisition, invest in new software, any of the things that would genuinely enhance the productivity and growth rate in the economy, and it raises interest rates in the process, which is absolutely right on the mark. So we are every day paying a small price for the fact that we've been 25 straight years running these large deficits. We've averaged over 5% of GDP in the 21st century. In 1 year, it's not that big a deal, but it adds up. And we now grow more slowly, about a percentage point slower in income per person than we did in the 20th century. And if you add that up, that's a lot of foregone income. And that's something that we're incurring and will continue to incur until we start changing the way we do business. And I think that's something that's not well understood. And then the last thing I'll say about the fix, this committee's jurisdiction's going to be on waste and regulatory reform. I think that's fantastic. I echo the things that Bill Beach said about your efforts on legislating on cleaning up the waste. I really want to endorse the notion of a legislated regulatory budget of some sort. I have been nothing short of amazed at the success of the Trump administration in its first and now again at delivering a regulatory state that is cheaper. We keep very close track of this at my think tank, but which thus far has demonstrated nothing but efficiency gains. We haven't seen a decline in safety or any of the things that we worry about with excessive deregulation. So that's something that I think Congress should look carefully at, make a permanent feature of the landscape. There's no question about it. When money is tight in the budget, you try to get the policy objectives done another way. You regulate it. You tell the private sector to do it. It's still costing the economy. So putting both of those on a budget, I think it'd be a good idea. Outside of those, you're going to have to do some sort of major tax reform to grow as quickly as possible and raise the revenue that we need. And you're going to have to do reform of the big spending programs. There's no way around that. So this has to be a comprehensive effort to take on what I view as the single biggest domestic policy problem we have. I think it's not an exaggeration to say this is the enemy within. It will threaten our economy, it'll threaten financial markets, and it will threaten our national security, and we need to take it on as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Make sure you tell us how to say your last name.
Consul.
Consul?
Consul. Thank you so much. Chairman Burleson, Ranking Member Frost, and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. My name is Mike Consul. I'm here to say that if you are concerned about the trajectory of the debt and deficit in this country, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was a generational mistake. It's impossible to reconcile being worried about the national debt with supporting the actions taken with that law. At a moment of near full employment, there is an opportunity to think seriously about the medium-term trajectories of revenue and spending. The Trump administration and Congress did the opposite, raising the deficit an additional $3.4 trillion over the next decades. There are other estimates as well. To partially pay for the tax cut driving this deficit, the bill imposed severe cuts to health care, food, and income support, layered on top of tariffs the American consumers are now bearing in higher prices. You can't take the debt seriously by having Americans sacrifice so the already wealthy can pay even less. The CBO finds that under OBBBA, the bottom 20% of American households lose a total of $24 billion each year, while the top 10% gain $190 billion. Once you account for the administration's tariffs, households in the bottom 70% on average lose ground, according to the Yale Budget Lab. You know these numbers. Next, I'd say the reason we're on this trajectory is 25 years of tax cuts that have hollowed out our revenue base. 25 years ago, there was no structural budget deficits. Revenues were expected to keep up with the rising cost of baby boomers' retirements. It is very hard to project many things, but we all know we age 1 year every year, and the costs of Medicare and Social Security and the retirement of the baby boomers more generally was predictable. In fact, in 2012, CBO projected that the 2025 deficit would be at 1.8% of GDP. It came in at 5.8% of GDP. That entire gap is a revenue story. Programmatic spending actually came in slightly below what CBO projected. Revenues came in more than 4 percentage points of GDP below it. Without the Bush and Trump tax cuts, debt to GDP ratios would be around 55%, according to estimates from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, not the 100% it currently is. Today's deficits come from tax cuts, not runaway spending. This committee is tasked with tackling government waste. I want to note that the OBBBA creates a giant wasteful time tax on families who rely on Medicaid and SNAP. Research from the Hamilton Project finds that the majority of subject to work requirements are already working, but more than a third will periodically fall below the required hour threshold, not because they stopped working, but because of the volatile scheduling common in low-wage industries. Workers shouldn't lose health care because their employers cut their hours. If we're serious about waste, we already know where it is. The tax gap, tax legally owed but not paid, runs at roughly $700 billion a year, the 1% alone accounting for more than $160 billion of that. Every $1 invested in IRS enforcement against high-income taxpayers returns at least $5 in revenue. Rather than address this or build it up, this administration has gutted the enforcement capacity the Inflation Reduction Act built up. On regulations, we're living through the worst regulatory environment for business on record. Companies dislike bad regulations, but they really hate regulatory uncertainty. The Economic Policy Uncertainty Index, run by a team of economists, including one affiliated with Dr. Raub's institution at the Hoover Institution, has the highest readings on record for 2025 on average through 2025 to 2026, matched only by the months immediately following the COVID outbreak and lockdown. This administration has personalized regulations on behalf of its own interests. One example I always use is the president pressured Intel into giving the federal government a 10% equity stake, bragging publicly that the CEO, quote, walked in wanting to keep his job and he ended up giving us $100 billion, end quote. No CEO making a capital expenditure today can be confident that next year's deal won't be the subject of tomorrow's investigation. That uncertainty has a cost. I'd say in conclusion, and I think this is hopefully something I think we'll all agree on, if we're serious about the national debt in terms of like the next year, we cannot stand by while the president exerts personal political pressure on the Federal Reserve, including criminal investigations against the sitting governor and the Fed chair. For another day, along sustained public campaigns demanding the rate cuts he wants. This is a fiscal concern just as much as a democratic one. We may be able to adjust spending and taxes in the medium term, but if you destabilize Fed independence, if you lose that, if the Trump administration does what it is trying to do, it will take a generation to rebuild that. And it's a fiscal concern just as much as a democratic one. Political pressure on the Fed creates political instability premiums that raise rates on the national debt, the credit cards, mortgages, and auto loans Americans use every day. It does not surprise me that Americans are far angrier about the economy than they were in 2024. Consumer sentiment has deteriorated sharply as inflation, both headline and underlying, has accelerated over the past 6 to 9 months. Americans see large-scale cuts to programs they rely on and new limits on proven economic boosts to families. They see an administration not prioritizing either their kitchen table issues or the long-term health of the government's finances. I think there is still time to put the fiscal trajectory on a more sustainable footing, but every month we delay makes the work harder. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. I'll kind of just kick it off with a question. We're not going to do 5 minutes. If you have a question, just kind of give me a nod and I'll put you in the queue. I want to start off with what was kind of recognized, which is that the number one spending item is healthcare costs, right? When I explored, when you kind of look through this, for example, my wife and I, when we got married, 2002, healthcare premiums for a family of 4 were about approximately on average $6,000 a year. If you adjusted that for inflation, normal inflation, that should be south of actually $11,000. But instead today, the average family of 4 is paying $27,000 in premiums, and that's between the employer cost and what the employee is having to kick in. So if you said to every American today, you imagine under normal inflation, it would only be 11, 27. If you said, here's $16,000 a year, right? Or a little over $1,000 a month monthly, that would be life-changing. That would be game-changing. That right there is your mortgage payment. That a lot of families, when we ask the question, how can people not afford a home? That's probably one of the biggest reasons. You have health care that's exceeding inflation by almost double or triple normal inflation. And so how do we address that? Not only as the cost, because the cost is a private cost for the individual and the employers, but it's also clearly a cost to us because it's the fastest growing part of government expenditures. And so I'll open it up to whoever wants to address that, because if you don't, in my opinion, if you don't address that, there's no way that we can address or get to a point where we're balancing a budget. There's no way to tax enough to keep up with that growth. I don't know, if you're saying it's easy.
No, it's not. So in fact, I think one of the things to do is just sort of be real clear about, you can take the different problems and put them in different buckets. Social Security is analytically incredibly easy. I can fix it 1,000 different ways. It's just a matter of getting it done. Healthcare is really complicated, and so it's not going to be done sitting at a table in one swoop. It's going to be done year after year after year. Healthcare reform should be an every year item as we sort of get toward a system that makes more sense. But there's some things that just jump right out. Every health insurance policy in America is subsidized by the federal government. We subsidize Medicaid, we subsidize Medicare, we subsidize employer-sponsored insurance by not taxing it under the individual income tax. So we are basically saying to every insurance policy, here's a subsidy. Those subsidies make no sense. They aren't rational in any way. They're bigger for more affluent people under the ESI. The Medicaid and the ACA aren't matched up. And so one thing Congress could think hard about is, okay, let's have a rational system of subsidies for health insurance that has some policy objective and design it to meet that objective. That'd be a good first step.
So when I think about healthcare, I really don't want to think about that term, all right? Healthcare itself, because it kind of, what are we really talking about? So you have to break it down into its buckets. There are issues with hospitals, and those issues are really standalone issues. They're management issues, they're ownership issues. They go to the DSH payment, the disproportionate share payment for Medicaid patients, the way in which higher income individuals are charged and lower income, there's a lot of issues there. So let's put hospitals in one reform bucket. Then we have the pricing bucket. Medicare's pricing schedule, that it is constantly changing, and its diagnostic classification system, its normative care, its care in the hospital and outpatient. All of those prices oftentimes determine prices throughout the private provision of healthcare. So we need to think very seriously about how does Medicare set its prices? Is there something we can do in the Medicare price setting area that would be helpful to slowing price growth in other parts of the economy? At its base, there's the third bucket, and that is that we really don't have health insurance, we have health subsidies. If we had true insurance, we would have very few things insured and a lot of things not insured that would be handled by individual home budgets. But we have not evolved our system that way at all, and it probably is impossible to go back to it. Now what we have is a growing spectrum of conditions which are partially subsidized through pools. And so the question is, what can we do on health savings accounts and other kind to incentivize people to build savings in their own income capacities to offset some of these prices and slowly move our health insurance system not away, because I don't think we can ever get totally away, but slowly away from a subsidy system to an insurance system. And then the fourth bucket, and that is we need very carefully but resolutely promote better health. This can be done through the schools, through community groups, through massive programs of telling folks about the benefits of simple things like diet and exercise. Recent surveys of young men who are not in the labor force between the ages of 16 and 25 indicate that one of the ways in which they participate not in the labor force, I guess that's a strange concept, is to sit in front of their screens all day, playing video games primarily. 8-9 hours a day in front of screens.
Yeah.
And do they have friends? They don't have any friends. When was the last time in the year in which you exercise? I can't remember. Maybe I didn't exercise this past year. The labor force participation rate of young men is really bad, and so there's some problems in there, but the labor force participation of women in that same group is falling rapidly as well. And are their health behaviors going to set up a lifetime of poor health? So I think you really have to think in the buckets, and to think kind of comprehensively. Yeah, it's fine, but that really hasn't been productive of solving our problems. Healthcare continues to be a mounting challenge, and it is the #1 driver of the deficits because I don't think we've properly segmented the problem into its solvable parts.
You don't have to hold it.
I would just add that, I think the problem is a vast problem. The federal government needs to look at where it can have the sort of quickest and most effective impact, and that has to do with areas where the federal government is heavily subsidizing healthcare. And one of those areas is Medicaid, and partly because there are state decisions that states do not pick up the whole tab for, and when you're spending other people's money, you don't spend it as efficiently as when you're spending your own money. So, just to give one example of what's going on with Medicaid costs and some research that myself and Ben Jaros are releasing soon, we look into the California Medicaid program, which is called Medi-Cal, and just set aside the growth in enrollees from per enrollee costs have grown by $2,200 per enrollee since 2019, and around half of that, $980 of that, is excess above and beyond medical cost inflation growth. And so you're seeing these situations where you have inflation in the price of healthcare, and then above and beyond that, you have growth in Medicare costs. That's something direct that the federal government can directly address by improving the nature of cost sharing between federal and state governments in Medicaid, and ensuring that states are incentivized to actually provide health insurance in a more efficient way. And I think the other more general taking a step back and thinking about how do we address this for the entire population, it's just, lower cost plans with health savings accounts need to be incentivized in some way, because those are the ones where individuals and doctors actually have an incentive to think about the cost benefit trade-off instead of just sort of prescribing or agreeing to any service or any procedure that a doctor recommends. So I would be thinking about strategies like that. Some of my other colleagues at the Hoover Institution have suggested plans whereby individuals who have health plans where the price is below a certain median or benchmark price become eligible to contribute the difference to health savings accounts. I think those are the types of strategies that could really make a difference for the broader population.
Throw in, I really appreciate you. Sometimes people bring it up as like Social Security and Medicare, like all as one word, but breaking it into two different problems, I think is very important. Social Security is a pension program. There's a gap. You can figure out how to deal with that. Healthcare spending is a big problem, and it is a big problem for the economy. I also really like that the example was a young family that was trying to figure out how they're going to get a home or buy a home or make rent when they're also under very intense healthcare costs. But if healthcare costs are going to bankrupt the government, if we just kick them off to individual families, they'll just bankrupt individual families instead, right? So this was a big thing when sometimes people talk about voucherizing Medicare or turning Medicare into essentially a private option. That's going to drive up the cost, and it's going to drive up the cost for healthcare for the economy as a whole. I think many researchers have found. Broadly speaking, as you said, on the private market of healthcare, it's about $25,000 a year. For Medicare, it's about $18,000 a year, and for Medicaid, it's about $11,000 a year. A lot of ways you can measure that, but the broad trajectory of that is right. Public healthcare is cheaper, and it provides very good outcomes for the people on it. That's why the CBO, for instance, one way to help tackle healthcare costs, finds that a public option for healthcare reduces the deficit because it actually brings down the amount of healthcare spending that's required through other mechanisms in the ACA and other forms of healthcare. I think more broadly speaking, expanding private health or public forms of healthcare, that's how most other countries handle their healthcare costs. We are very unique in how much we spend for our health. There's essentially no country that handles it in a purely deregulated way. Your family couldn't afford to save for a mortgage, so how are they going to save for future healthcare costs in their healthcare savings funds if they can't, if they can barely make ends meet? And if they are able to save some, is it going to actually be able to cover their costs in the way an insurance fund should be working? And so, there's a lot of things you can do, I think, on Medicare Advantage that might have bipartisan support. The Trump administration briefly looked into that, and I hope they would try it again. There's things.
Are you referring to like the uprating of people?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's interesting that we would agree on that.
I don't know.
What? Yeah, because it's abusive.
Yes, absolutely.
It is absolutely insurance companies abusing the government's system.
Tons of waste.
And I think low estimates are about $800 billion over 10 years. And so even making a dent in that, I think would be like a real
Almost
number.
$1 trillion over 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's broadly understood on the side. So
that might be an opportunity for cooperation.
Yeah, and Chairman, I think we should look at who benefits the most in our broken healthcare system, because I think that will drive, we talk about subsidies, sometimes I don't think we realize how much subsidies we offer in the healthcare industry.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's important to acknowledge that, because we always talk about these other subsidies, but I think it's important to look at both. We can't, it's not fair to only be looking at subsidies that touch our residents' lives, but what about the subsidies that are given to the healthcare industry? And you know this, and many of us here know, I mean, we spend so much money. I don't know the percentage on research and development of drugs and all this stuff. And, they came here to the public and said, look, help us create these drugs. That's why it's so costly. Well, we can reduce the cost of diabetes drugs and insulin, all these things. But can you help us with research and development? We did, and they found a loophole to go patent it and then turn around and charge our residents exorbitant amounts of cost on our residents. And I think it's important because a lot of people always talk about the health savings plan, but I've met so many people that are very health conscious and, I ate the right way, everything, got cancer, and so I think we need to be very conscientious of it, but I think if we're going to fix waste and fraud, figure out who's benefiting the most, because it's not our residents. The subsidies is still not enough. It is the people that benefit the most are the ones making the most money, and that's the healthcare industry. But I know I want to talk to you, Dr. Beach, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you talked about the 90%, but wasn't the 90% GDP debt ratio based on a spreadsheet error?
So
by,
that's the,
Red
that's
Hart?
the famous.
Is it Red Hart and-
That's right.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say the name. They
right.
knew the firm.
It's not entirely based on that. There are the European Central Bank, other economic organizations that are well-known, Federal Reserve. They have found the percentage, as the percentage gets close to 90 or it goes above 90 or it gets to 85.
But you're not basing it off of that
Oh, no,
spreadsheet.
no,
'cause
but
that was
there's a-
widely spread, the
There's a
number
good-
was off.
There's a good story there because when Rogoff and Reinhardt, which is the
Yeah.
incident that you mentioned, we just had them testify. I was with the Senate Budget Committee, and it was quite shocking when that came out. And then they recalculated their numbers, fixing the 2 or 3 countries that had some serious data issues, and the percentages changed a little bit. They did. So if you use the revised numbers, which are the ones based on the data which they fixed, you kind of come up with the same results, but it was very damaging to their argument. Fortunately, Alberto Aldacina, as I say, a lot of European economists who've studied this, particularly in Italy, have found this also to be the case. And now we're seeing it in countries that are approaching that high percentage. That's why I say 90% shouldn't, it's not a magical number. It's just high percentage rapidly growing debt, Congresswoman. And I think everyone should be a little bit concerned about that because you do see some
Yeah,
slower
thank
growth
you. Do
rates.
you have it?
Yeah, in addition, the Excel error is actually the least of it because they basically coded it in such a way to really suppress
It was
a
a
lot of
coding error, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
it was
there's
a
also a
coding
choice in how they average things and a couple other things. I think more importantly, following up on that, once we kind of knew how the methodology worked a little bit better because it was a little quiet, people tended to find that it was actually it's a ratio, debt over GDP, and it was countries that were slowed their growth that had the increase, not the causation was the other way. So like slowing growth is the thing that caused it. So when you're looking at slowing growth, you want to look at things like taxing intermediate inputs, like tariffs. You want to look at regulatory uncertainty from demanding CEOs do things for you.
A lot
and
of things
other
you need to look at. And I was thinking about this when I was thinking about all of the efforts in the late 19th, early 20th century to get an airplane to fly, what was ultimately called an airplane to fly, with a powered engine. And they all fell down, right? They all crashed into the earth. And so that piece of research needs to be remembered. But it shouldn't be an obstacle to us knowing that when we have rapidly and high growing debt, we are crowding out other alternatives. And all of us have better ways of spending that money than spending it on interest payments.
Well, I know I have to go somewhere, but so if I may, one of the things that I think brings us both to get a lot of bipartisan support when we talk about deficit, everybody always goes immediately to Medicaid and Social Security. And I don't know, I get this so like, but what about the Department of War? And it's important because I think I grew up.
I'm actually
I
with
know,
you on
I know
that.
you are. So I still remember John Dingle complaining about $680 for toilets in the 80s. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, do you know, like, right now in 2018, we found out we were paying $10,000 for airplane toilets lids or something? I mean, I only say this because, like, recently, they did a study, the Pentagon did, a study showing about 125 billion in waste, and I think there's more. And they can't account for 40% of their assets. The other really important things, like in 2024, I think it was 2 years ago, when we actually did some oversight and did look at, because to me, there's those subsidies in some ways. Defense contract like Raytheon, they had to pay us back $950 million. That was a settlement. Settlements are not really what they, and it was not just for overinflation, like overpricing us. It was also because they used it for bribes. And so I think, we should really, if we're going to do it, because residents don't want to be like always going towards what touches the residents, but what about the Department of War and the fact that there's this type of just concentrated waste and fraud in there?
And they can't pass an audit.
They can't 8 audits in a row, but it's even deeper than that. I think there is a culture that's been there that I feel like leaves our service members aside, is heavy, private defense contractors, right? And we should have a serious conversation about that and what that looks like, because,
I could not agree.
I have service members that are back and cannot believe that this amount of money's in there, but they still are struggling with themselves to get access to things that they need. So, but I do think when we talk about it, because everybody always goes to Social Security, Medicaid, and of course that's important. But I don't want to blame the residents and take it from them, maybe because that's the easy way. Why aren't we going towards who makes the most money from this? It's not our residents. It's these contractors. It's the healthcare industry. It's the people that benefit the most from it being this broken and this inflated.
Totally agree.
I think this is a really important point, because I am the guy who always points to Social Security and Medicare, but the way I think about it, those are numerically what they are. Social Security and Medicare, the two of them by themselves, more than half of all non-interest spending in the next 10 years. Those are big numbers. But they're also crucial elements to the social safety net, and the voters are not going to let you touch them unless they are sure that you're using all the money wisely. And they don't believe all the money is being used wisely in the Department of Defense. They don't believe all the money is being used wisely in all the federal programs. So you really do have to get what are, by comparison, smaller dollar fixes before you're going to get permission to actually solve the problem. I think that's absolutely the way it's going to work.
No,
I
please.
think we also should, I think it was you that said it beautifully. The people that need to pay taxes that is legally already owed but not paid. I heard you. These are folks that owe us money, even with all the tax breaks we gave them, the subsidies that we gave them. These are folks, corporations. I have so many of my residents that work for like Amazon and other places, but we're subsidizing food assistance, health insurance, everything, because they're not paying enough or they actually do it in a way where they're not even giving them enough money to do full time. They keep them at a certain hour rate so they don't have to give them any benefits. But I feel like this is also a place that we should also look at that brings us together and making sure that people pay what they're lawfully are supposed to be paying right now. Yeah, I don't. I just say this because I feel very much my residents watch this and they wonder, what about everything else? Why are you always coming towards our services?
Well, one of the challenges, and I appreciate your points, Mr. Consul, about the tax gap. Part of the tax gap is because the tax code is so unbelievably complex, and simplifying the cost of compliance with the federal tax code is estimated itself at $500 billion, and so there's potentially a lot of savings that could be had there to improve it. I just wanted to comment briefly on the discussion about the debt to GDP ratio. One of the reasons that I focus on interest payments in my testimony is that I think the debt to GDP ratio and the focus on that, there being some magic threshold, is a bit problematic. Just look at the amount of interest that we're paying right now, and just look at the amount of interest we're going to be paying going forward on standard CBO projections, which I happen to think are actually too optimistic. But even those have more than half the non-Social Security budget going to interest payments in over 30 years. So that's why I like to focus on those numbers.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
gentlemen, thank you for being here. I'm pretty sure that Dr. Beach, Dr. Raw, Dr. Holtzeek, and Mr. Consul are all experts in your field. And in some way, you have an alphabet behind your name on your business card that has to do with economics, I'm pretty sure. I'm also pretty sure you three are gonna disagree with that gentleman on a lot of things. Welcome to Congress. And so we try to hammer out policies to address this crippling debt. It's unsustainable, it's gonna kill our country before China or Iran will. And yet, if you four can't agree, what the hell are we supposed to do? So we seek some common agreement that we can pursue, which I'm gonna ask, what would be the impact of eliminating deficit spending? We have, America existed till 1980 before we had $1 trillion in debt. We now have $40 trillion in debt. If we were to balance the budget and run a $1 billion deficit, it would require 40,000 years
Surplus, yeah.
of a $1 billion surplus to address a $4 trillion debt. So this is a lot of money. And the nation has not always been crippled with that level of debt. It is unsustainable. So we could argue about how to accomplish a balanced budget. I would say it's not by taxing the billionaires, because there's only about 750 of them in America. They control $5 to $7 trillion worth of debt. You could not just tax them, you could seize everything they have. And then what are you going to do? You're spending $7 trillion a year. What are you going to do next year? You got no billionaires. So you're not going to tax your way out of this thing. It's absurd. You got to drive your economic growth and stop adding to the debt. Because I think we're a wealthy nation. We sell 20-year Treasury bonds. I think if we balance the budget, I think we're within a few decades of being clear. We can be back into the mid-20th century debt to GDP ratio and debt to yeah, it'd be a good, yeah, in a short amount of time. So our credit rating would be through the roof. So if we were to balance the budget, I'm asking, it's my only question, eliminate deficit spending, what would happen to America's economic future for every American? On the left, on the right, young, old, rich, poor, all of us. What would happen to America's economic future if this body were to balance the budget?
Yeah, well, thank you. If you balance the budget, you're making better decisions than you're making now, because I think the decisions you're making now are pretty poor. That in itself will be a decisive economic plus, because the Congress will then say, we know their problems, we're going to handle it within our budget, we're going to handle it by making choices, we're going to do trade-offs. Right away, you get more investment. You get more investment at this point in time. We're about to make this revolutionary change to transform the workplace through AI. You could have significant per capita income growth, wealthier people, so forth and so on. So from a standpoint of your fiscal issues, your revenues look pretty good. I think the tax code is about the worst designed tax code you could possibly make, because you've got almost all the taxes on the income side up on the upper income side. It's just a huge amount of burden up there among the very people who have the money to avoid paying the taxes. If I had to design a tax code that wouldn't work, that's the way I would design it. So
Again, welcome to Congress.
So
without getting into the weeds about how to do it, because we're going to have to seek concurrence here in Congress. You have to get to 218. You can't get to 2 out of 4 on a concurrence on how to do this. And we're going to try. But if we were to balance the budget, what would America look like in 20 years economically?
Well, just in a very short amount of time, the growth rate rises to 3.5% to 4% after inflation. And if there is any inflation at that point, there'll probably be some, because there will be a huge amount of demand for goods and services in the short run.
Can you walk me through that? So why would the growth rate increase? It's because there's
Well,
more availability in the bond market for
There's
businesses?
a couple of things that happen when investment rises, and these, I'm just make broad generalities here. And that is that with workers have new tools, factories look better, we have a much more agile economy, we're addressing things more quickly, we're engaged in international value chains more effectively, we're moving our assets around the world, we're making investments, and our financial markets are very strong. You just boom, 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 things look better. All of that adds up to a greater amount of output in the economy per person. What really matters here is the productivity of the worker. That's really where the focus should be, and not necessarily does GDP get better. It will. So I think when you have, when you're doing less crowding out, when you're borrowing less, when the financial markets, and especially the Federal Reserve, is not just constantly trying to figure out how to buy your notes and is actually engaged in real monetary policy, then those sort of positive things happen. Let me just say, nobody can predict what 20 years from now will look like. But you know if it'll look better or worse based on your short-term stuff. If you borrow more, if you don't make good decisions here in Congress, if you avoid the hard stuff, then is the future going to be brighter? No, it's not going to be brighter. If there's less investment, are low-income people going to be better off? Probably not. I mean, worker productivity is really all about scaling from young people to older workers who have more experience, and everybody starts poor. Almost everybody starts poor. So I think there are decisions that need to be made. We've got some tough ones here that can't be made, as you say, because it's hard to make these big decisions. So that's why in my testimony, you are here for that, I say, do some small things right now. Indicate the direction that you're going to go, and don't wait around to do that. I think it's really important that you do it. And I've suggested a few small things. I think the work of this committee, you really should be in the leadership in changing the fiscal path, because you're doing stuff like waste, fraud, and abuse, regulatory reform. You're digging in to the things that need to be fixed, and you're making those small steps. Just make them more public so people can see them.
Could I add something briefly, just to build on, to sketch out the mechanism that you have in mind? I mean, as I pointed out in my testimony, based on pretty standard models, if we were where we were with debt to GDP 20 years ago, right, at 35% instead of 101%, then interest rates would be, under the CBO's type of modeling, 1.3 percentage points lower. Under what I think would be consensus economics modeling, 2.6 percentage points lower. Okay, what does that do? In addition to what I emphasized in my testimony, it shaves, $515 off of the cost of a new mortgage for a U.S.-based person. A month. A monthly payment on the mortgage shaves $515 off of that for a new mortgage for a median home in 2026 right now. Okay, so that's one thing. But on the growth side, what does it do? The lower interest rates affect the user cost of capital. That's the sort of hurdle rate metric that businesses implicitly use to decide whether or not to invest. And so if you have a much lower user cost of capital, you're getting a lot more investment. And some research that we've done, and there's a long-standing history of this work, estimating the effects of lower user cost of capital on investment, we find very, very robust reactions. And it's interesting that Congress has focused, I think, on the one hand, rightly, on reducing business taxation is one element of reducing that burden, but the other element of that burden is the interest rate, and the interest rate is affected by debt and deficits, and so that's that's how you get that driver. You get much more investment, you get much lower interest rates, get much more investment, you get higher capital stock and a long run prosperity, and that's why it works.
I'd like to amend the thought experiment a little bit. I think the thought experiment should be balance the budget, keep it balanced, and keep your job. Get reelected. And for that to happen, the voters are going to have to say, the things we had to do, pay higher taxes, have less spending, have a different regular state, whatever it may have been, is worth it. And they're not convinced of that right now. If you went out and did that tomorrow, you'd lose your job. I assure you. If you ask people unprompted, what are the problems that America faces? The deficit and debt comes in like 6th or 7th. They are blissfully unaware that the federal government is a threat to their future. There is no president who's run for office in the 21st century who said, national debt's a problem, we're going to have to take it on. I understand this is hard work, I'll lead Congress. No one said a word. So I think the vast majority of Americans are unaware there's a problem, and they're not going to have you fix it until you first educate them and convince them there is one. I think that's step number one. It's more important than all the mechanisms we might dream up. It's getting a political consensus to say we have a problem. Once you say, oh, we have a problem, then we'll fix it. But we aren't there yet.
And don't you think, Doug, that when that happens, when Congress starts to make these moves, when Congress starts to make these decisions, however small, however large, then some of the power that Congress has sort of seen go away comes back. Because I think this is the Article I branch is where all these problems need to be addressed. I mean, they are in your hands. And I think that's a really important part of it.
I don't know how much we want to get into this part of it, but I would caution about thinking that the economy would be fundamentally changed if the deficit, if the debt happened to be lower. Interest rates would probably be about a percentage point lower, as was brought up. But it's important to remember, right now interest rates, 10-year treasuries, are lower than they were in the late 1990s when there was virtually no government debt or was on a trajectory to actually be a surplus. There's a lot of other forces working in the economy, and these are all counterfactual, so it's very difficult to kind of hold any one piece of the economy consistent, but aging of the population, global trends, so on and so forth. So I'd be cautious about thinking the economy would be fundamentally different and much more think of it as a risk management
I
scenario.
think there's a tipping point, though, in the other direction that can happen very quickly, like insolvency. What happens when the Treasury can't sell bonds? And you have, if you're carrying a $2 trillion annual debt, and you have a nosedive economy for some reason, some kind of worldwide or hemisphere-wide economic impact that drives your economy, into the tank, and you have very low revenues, you got $2 trillion debt, and the Treasury can't sell bonds because our future doesn't look good, we're basically insolvent. What do? That drops like a hammer on the whole country.
I think that scenario is less likely for a country like the United States as opposed to like a developing country or some other countries where those kinds of things have happened, like Greece in the 2010s. What I would say is if you're, which is why I would propose thinking of it as a risk management. How do you deter the risk of these bad scenarios happening? Biggest risk of that happening is a government default during a shutdown, right? Or, I'm sorry, a debt ceiling shutdown. I mean, that's one reason the government, all the ratings agencies downgraded the US government is because they were worried that you might have a default scenario. Maybe we can do something to take that off the table in a bipartisan manner or manage that a little bit easier.
Do you think the shutdown affected the Treasury?
I meant debt ceiling, not the
like
shutdown.
This year and last year.
I meant a debt ceiling scenario where you might actually have a default or at least a technical default, and so I'd be worried about some of those things. I think a lot of things we're doing internationally, trying to like provoke other countries on the dollarization. I think that's probably not wise if we don't want to avoid some fiscal financial crisis scenarios. So I would consider also thinking of it as more risk management rather than if we do this, it's going to like fundamentally transform the economy because we've had a lot of different debt scenarios in the last 30 years and a lot of other things are always in motion.
The debt ceiling, the debt ceiling is currently structured probably, as David Malpass indicated in what he's submitted to the committee, to the subcommittee, probably in its current form actually increases just more spending, deals to increase the debt limit and more spending. That doesn't mean that there isn't a version of a debt ceiling. It could potentially incentivize Congress in ways that would create better outcomes, such as what we saw out of what were bipartisan agreements around 2011 and 2012 during the Obama administration, Republican-controlled Congress, ultimately leading to the Budget Control Act, the sequester, and I think some real spending reforms that were part of that. So there may be ways to specify a debt ceiling that are more salutary than what we have now.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Do you have something on this?
I just wanted to talk a little bit. I think it's important to not think there's a magic line that you cross. We don't know what that is. I would have said most of the things that Mr. Consul said 10 years ago. I always thought that's really far off for the U.S. We don't have to worry about it. But the recent evidence is different. We got downgraded twice because we couldn't manage our finances. debt ceiling showdowns, government shutdowns. When Moody's downgraded us most recently, they said, you have too much debt, and interest takes up too much of your revenue.
Exactly right.
That's the problem, not the management. The United Kingdom looks just like the United States. Deficit about 6% of GDP, debt about 100% of GDP, just doesn't have a reserve currency, and it is in all sorts of trouble with world capital markets. And when we saw the tariffs and the fallout last April, for the first time, when there was financial market risk, people ran away from the United States. Historically, it's always been flight to safety, you go get treasuries. They ran. And those are all three developments that I don't like, that make me think we are more exposed to a big problem. And it's time to take that risk off the table and deal with this problem.
I wanted to bring up, I'm glad you brought up the tariffs. I think a big part of this too is our, decisions that we're making in Congress, big bills that we're putting forth. You had brought up earlier, Mr. Consul, the big beautiful bill, and I think it's really important to talk about this. I mean, I personally believe that we have a broken tax system that we have to reform, and I agree with that. I do think that there's room for some of the most wealthiest people in our country to contribute more. I do know that that won't completely solve the problem, but when you take a step back, we've kind of tested our theory of the case, right, through different presidencies on different economic policies and ways that we can fix this. And what we've seen is since 1989, Republican presidents have grown the deficit, Democratic presidents have decreased the deficit. I mean, it's just the numbers. And I kind of want to get into that a little bit because I think it can help show us the way forward in this. And, some numbers that everyone knows. Obama leaves office, cut the deficit by $700 billion, Biden $1 trillion. When Bush left office, he increased by $1.5 trillion. Trump won $2.1 trillion. So I guess, is the One Big Beautiful Bill just another iteration of this kind of theory that, tax giveaways for the wealthy are gonna in turn decrease the deficit, or is it unique?
I think the thing that stood out to me was that it was negotiated at a period where it was pretty close to full employment, as opposed to the early 2010s, or even arguably 2017, where I think there was a moment to really kind of think through the medium trajectory without having to worry about necessarily doing short-term macroeconomic damage, and it wasn't taken. It just kicked the can way further down the field, and I think put so much revenue off the table. There are serious numbers here. If you're looking even looking at above people making above $400,000 a year, and to not take that opportunity to at least start to right the ship is rough. And then secondly, you look at the Bush tax cuts, and everyone got a piece of that, right? You argue the right way to think about whether it was progressive or who paid what or the dollars or the percents. But here you really do have serious cuts, and if you just want to look at the tariffs, which I think you should look at in part, bottom half, bottom 70%, but certainly bottom 20%, are going to end up paying more or receiving less services to help keep the status quo. I mean, there's one thing people talk about grand bargains where there's some cuts and there's some tax increases, but this is just cuts and tax cuts. And I think that's a really bad way to have approached it in the macro fiscal situation we were last year.
Yeah, first of all, I actually think that OB3 did start to right the ship. Let me explain why I say that. So first of all, just on the question of revenues versus expenditures, we've been bumping around our revenues between 17 and 18% of GDP for decades, and right now we're scheduled to go up to 17.8%. Spending is 21%, scheduled under current law to go up to 24%. You have to look at that and say fundamentally it's a revenue problem now, or it's spending problem. Now let's look at the revenues. Yeah.
So what you're saying is no matter what the tax rate is or who you're taxing, it's gonna bump around 17.
I say empirically the ways that tax reform seems to be implemented in Congress, yeah, it's going to bump around between 17% and 18%. And
you're talking about, to what you just said, you're talking about the way it could happen given the current political climate or the political climate that we've had, right? Is that what you mean?
Well, it's also that once you start raising taxes more, you end up with more avoidance, evasion, less labor supply. I'm not sure how possible it is to raise more revenue without taxing There are ways to do it, but you're going to end up taxing broader swaths of the population because the upper income, okay, so the top 10% pay 70% of federal income taxes. This is the group that's the most responsive to federal taxation. So I'm just very pessimistic about one's ability to squeeze out more revenue from that group. There certainly are ways that Congress could raise more revenue, but what it would be doing would be reaching into the middle class of the population, implementing things like consumption tax or value-added tax. I don't know whether you want to do that, but it's not that it would be impossible. I just want to say also on OB3, you know, people have been talking about the OB3 based on the CBO's score of $4 trillion, over $4 trillion, or $3.4 trillion over 10 years on primary deficits. And I just want to say that things have already moved beyond that prediction or that projection. So first of all, CBO itself has raised its GDP growth projections. And not 100% of that is due to OB3, but some of it is due to OB3. If you get 0.3 percentage points more of GDP growth, if that was what they raised it by, if all of that were due to the tax cuts, you'd cut $1 trillion off that estimate. We don't know exactly from their disclosures how much, but I would estimate that 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points of this additional 0.3% is due to OB3, and so I think you're cutting hundreds of billions of dollars off of the score based on just what we've already seen going on. Secondly, the CBO has said that we should use different debt sensitivity interest rates for tax cuts versus spending increases. And so if you implement what they say one should actually do, they didn't do it. The additional debt coming from OB3 would knock off another $200–300 billion from the score. And in addition, some work that we've done suggests that by not incorporating avoidance and evasion and how much less that is when rates are lower, the score could be by an additional hundreds of billions of dollars lower. So I actually think that on the revenue side, OB3 is a step in the right direction, or is not such a large step in the wrong direction, I'll put it that way. And on the spending side, it's a major step in the right direction because it finally implements some what I thought of as being bipartisan principles around benefit programs that you have to actually work or provide some community engagement if you want access to.
And Dr. Beach, I know you want to say something, but just a quick response. I see you kind of separated the spending from the revenue to give, I guess, different comment on both. But I mean, that's not the way legislation works, right? I mean, we view the totality of the impact that the bill will have on our constituents in the nation. And you have to look at both at the same time and can't separate them because you might be a fan of one part of it and not a fan of the other part. But,
although on net, I do not think that OB3 raises deficits significantly over the long run.
You said not so.
I think the score was considerably too high for the three reasons that I gave, and that's
CBO. Just as a clarifying, CBO's dynamic score was much higher, though, wasn't it?
That's because of their debt sensitivity assumption. That's because they say, yeah, you're going to get more growth, but that's going to lead to higher interest rates, and that's going to lead to
and you also believe that sensitivity is too low.
Pardon me?
You also believe that sensitivity is too low.
I believe that sensitivity is too low on the spending side, but there's an asymmetry. There's an asymmetry of taxes and spending that they've written about. For tax cuts, empirically it's lower. For spending increases, it's higher. And since 2/3 of, according to, so I don't know where your number comes from that this is all a revenue problem, but according to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, which is nonpartisan, they tell their estimate is that it's 2/3 spending, 1/3 tax. So that's why I would emphasize the spending number.
And to be clear, I mean, for me, I think we have both a revenue and a spending problem. But I do think it's important to look at things we've done recently as a Congress and look at it with a clear eye and try to determine is this the way forward? If it was so good, if we did it 2 more times in the next 2 Congresses, would that put us in a better situation? But sorry, Dr. Beach.
I was going to agree with you in large part. I think it's a 3-part problem. I don't think it's 1/3, 2/3. I think you have to look at both revenues and at spending. And why do I say that? Because the recent work by the Joint Committee on Taxation, I'm happy to send your staff this work, indicates that the current tax code construction is bouncing up against these barriers, avoidance barriers, barriers of legal avoidance that have really been the product of the complexity of our code. And it's going to be really, really hard to get additional revenues out of that 10%. It's a really interesting study. So given that, if you want to have additional revenues to address the needs of the spending side, as you transition to maybe a Hamiltonian norm of a 3 to 4% deficit per year, you're going to have to find a tax system that produces additional revenues without hurting the economic growth or the social distribution of that you're aiming at. And I think our tax code now is really poorly designed. It got worse in one big beautiful bill in terms of complexity. So all things should be on the table. Mr. Frost, I think you should think about these things broadly. I think the healthcare bill that you have, Mr. Burleson, is excellent in the way that it moves on that front. But
I
on
would
the
love to
revenue
get Mr.
side,
Frost to co-sponsor my bill.
let's not lose sight of the thread here. The thread is that we will not be able to solve this deficit problem on the revenue side. The revenue side has to be a part of it, and we should go for a simpler tax system with a broader base. Democrats and Republican tax analysts for decades agreed that was the route we should go, and we went the other route. So let's get back to good tax policy. And then let's remember that 2.5 times of outlay growth is coming from our mandatory programs. So they're just dying for reform. And we mustn't lose that thread. I think sometimes when we get involved with the revenue debate, which we should be, I'm not discouraging that, then we lose sight of the larger problem which is out there, which is these unreformed programs. Social Security can't be reformed in the short run because we've got a lot of old people coming into the system right now. But you can start with younger people and encourage them to build up some kind of savings account as a supplement to their Social Security. Most believe they'll never get Social Security anyway, so they're probably pretty receptive to some kind of a system that does provide for their own retirement. Make sure that everybody across the income scale gets that. But these are practical things we can do. Yeah.
I can kind of speak a little bit to the complexity of the tax code really benefiting the wealthy.
Yeah.
I was a financial advisor, and some of my high net worth clients, there were things that are available to them or that they could leverage, things like conservation easements, right? Tribal tax credits, you name it. If there was products out there that the vast majority of the American population would have no access to or knowledge of. Even if they were knowledgeable of them, they probably wouldn't be able to gain access because you'd have to have a lot of money to get access to these. This is fundamentally unfair.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something that, like, as a fiscal conservative who believes that taxes should be low and broad, we would probably unite on something like that to eliminate some of these loopholes, but as a result, make the tax rate lower for the people who are at the bottom end of the spectrum, right? Or
Right.
the middle class people who are just trying to work and put food on the table. What I kind of wanted to share with you guys a little bit of the inside of the One Big Beautiful Bill, as being one of those like pesky members who actually cares about the debt. That I ran on that, and it really weighed on me that we would pass something like what Republicans typically do, right? When Democrats seem to be in control, there's this appetite to spend and not necessarily, basically just increase the deficit by increasing spending. When Republicans get in, we want to cut taxes, but not necessarily reduce spending, but not necessarily increase it as much as well. And the end result is all we do is just ratchet up the debt and the deficit. So I didn't want to be a part of that. And so I was part of a group that held out and fought tooth and nail to get it as close to balanced as possible. And I think this town said, you will never get there. And I think that we defied the odds and we got pretty damn close. If anything, what people do not know is that we exceeded it at about 2 a.m. And in those conversations at 2 a.m. conversations, and we're called the 3 a.m. caucus, we got significant executive action, and that would actually put us over the line as far as making it something that would not exacerbate or worsen the deficit. And so And those are kind of broadly now talked about in the press, so I can talk about them. But mostly it was closing the loopholes that had been left by the Senate on the Green New Deal. You know, ironically,
The Green New Deal was passed?
I'm talking about closing the loopholes that were left in place on the Green New Deal.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Right, so.
The Inflation Reduction Act, okay.
Sorry. So what I mean is, and ironically, this town, it's not ironic, but this town, you know, when you're trying to find cost savings, the first thing that they cut when it came to those incentives were the things that were actually benefit a lower class citizen. So tax credits for like residential solar, tax credits for buying an electric vehicle, right? And so my position was, and many people's position was, you should treat them all the same. What's ironic is that, and what was coming out of the Senate, because certain senators, was left in place tax credits for the large utility companies and large corporations, but yet cutting everything for the middle class. And so to me, that was horrible. We were able to get the Trump administration to recognize that and cut that off through executive action. That saved hundreds of billions of dollars. And I think it's something that was overlooked and things, because it wasn't explicitly in the bill.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of express that. So
But I
you
guess,
understood.
what, oh yeah, go ahead.
So if I could, I mean, I thought an important point is OB3 is a lot of different things, and you shouldn't just say it's good or it's bad. I mean, I think the most important thing it did is that we didn't have a $425 billion tax increase that would have meant a recession. That would have been bad for everybody. So didn't let the code to sunset. I thought the full expensing, business provisions being made permanent was good tax policy, a great idea. The rest, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, cut for seniors, state and local property tax section, all those provisions, that's not low and broad. That's junk. I mean, I didn't think that was good tax policy at all. And it was a huge miss on an opportunity to really reduce future deficits. I mean, it just didn't do that. So it's hard for me to say it's good or it's bad. It's a real mixed bag. I mean, it really is. And it won't be the same 3-4 years from now, because circumstances do matter. And I think the real lesson of the CBO dynamic score and its analysis of the bill, and for the record, CBO is always right. I'm just here to tell you that. The real lesson was every previous CBO dynamic score that looked at tax cuts on a bill like that found that there were modest growth benefits and the net increase in the deficit was smaller than otherwise would be. For this one, they found the reverse. We have so much debt outstanding that the interest rate increases that came from the bill made the interest cost so much larger that the deficit actually got bigger, not smaller in the dynamic score. That tells you we are in uncharted territory and it's time to fix it.
Yeah, that's that fiscal space issue. Yeah. Exactly.
One of my takeaways is what you said, Dr. Rock, which is, and I'm going to try to paraphrase it so that I can speak to my constituents. In short, everyone's mortgage interest rates or mortgage rates would be nearly 2.5 percentage points lower if we would just balance the budget.
Correct.
That is an unbelievable takeaway. Send tweet to my staff.
Get that out.
I've already tweeted it out there, but I don't have as big of an audience as you do, Mr. Chairman.
Send
so-
retweet to your staff.
I'm sure Mr. Frost has a bigger audience than I do. Okay, so I don't know if you guys have any other closing thoughts or comments, but I really greatly appreciate this. I think it was a good discussion.
I want to flag one thing, because I think it's been underappreciated. Everyone knows the Social Security trust fund is going to exhaust in 2032, 6 years out. And what that means is that by law, you can only pay benefits with money in the trust fund, and the only money that will be in the trust fund will be each year's payroll taxes. And that's not enough to pay full benefits, so there's the threat of an across-the-board cut of 25% in retirement. So that means that somehow, to avoid people in retirement having their benefits cut, you have to put an additional 25% into the trust fund. That's $600 billion in 2032 alone.
Yep.
Where are you going to get it? So if you want to ask the question, sort of big fiscal policy questions,
The cliff is coming.
it's here.
Yeah.
It is here right now. And so I want to stress the urgency of starting to deal with it. That's a big part of the overall problem, but it is in and of itself a really difficult problem to solve.
Can I quickly explore an idea and see what you guys think of this? So when the debate was occurring within the GOP about H-1B visas and just generally visa holders in the United States, and the displacement of U.S. workers that sometimes it might occur, right? In looking at that and evaluating that at the time, I found out that a visa holder, by and large, does not pay FICA. It would make sense because they're not going to be benefiting from FICA. But you and I have to pay FICA. I would rather not have to pay FICA. I think it's a horrible investment and has a horrible return. But I do have to pay it. And as a result, so does my employer. They have to pay that 7.5%, and I have to pay the other 7.5%. That's 15% that's a cost to me that is not a cost to a non-US resident. And so what I was exploring is there a way that we can add some kind of something to bring the economic difference between a foreign worker and a US worker so that there is not necessarily an incentive to hire a foreign worker and still be able to take those funds, basically tax them the same or the equivalent, if not more, and those funds go to shore up the Social Security Trust Fund. It's just an idea.
I actually don't know this, but my understanding is it generally the opposite, that immigrants often pay into the system but don't take out, and thus they're stabilizing, but people might know this question better than me. Should jump in.
That's my understanding.
There's a significant number of visa holders that do not pay they don't pay a FICA. What I'm saying is Social Security tax.
That's just by law.
Right.
Yeah, so their tax withholdings are generally remitted to their home country.
Yeah.
So that it's to support their Social Security equivalent back where they actually have legal residence. The only problem I would have, I haven't thought this through, of course, but the problem I would have about selecting American residents over foreign residents is that we live in an international division of labor. And we have experts, people who have skills coming from other countries. And it's sometimes, just like it's hard to replace all products that we import by making them here, it oftentimes is very difficult to replace people that we don't make here. It's a funny way of thinking about it, but so I think we're stepping in the direction that you want to go is to make sure that our immigration system is based on skills, and so that we have a sense of who we need. We won't know for sure who it is, but who we need. And you could have asylum, and you could have some family reunification, some attributes of the current system. But we do need to get to a better immigration system so that we can make those kinds of choices more intelligently. And maybe it will be that we want to encourage the development of more carpentry here and more computer programming here and more brain surgery here. If we have a skills registry in place, we'll have a better sense of where we're going. So I think what you're suggesting is tied, unfortunately, into fundamental immigration reform.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And I think this was a good conversation. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.